Hi and welcome to our webinar on the trouble with toilet training. Here at Firefly, we're always looking for ways to work with and for our community, and this is an area that some of you seem to be unclear on where to turn for the right support and guidance on. We hope you find this session informative and very useful. So our panellists tonight are Davina Richardson, a continence advisor from Bladder and Bowel UK, James Gilmore, an occupational therapist for Firefly, and Sarah Brisden, a Change Places campaigner and mum to Hadley and Erica. And I'm Sophie, I'm part of Firefly's marketing team, and also with us tonight are Claire Greer and Laura Finney, and they'll be taking part in the question session later. And just as you'll probably pick up, we're all based in the UK, so just to bear in mind some of our language. We may say nappies instead of diapers and wheeze and poos. Just to clear that up now, apologies for any confusion in advance. And now we're going to move on to the aims and objectives for this evening. So we're going to provide a history on toilet training and the movement from a parent-led approach to a child-focused approach, and we'll be hearing from Davina on this. And then James will be moving on to the correlation between disability and toileting independence. And then we're going to hear from Sarah about her personal experiences with toilet training with Hadley. And towards the end of the session, we're going to find out the outcomes whenever the proper supports are in place. So we'll move on to Davina now.
Hello. Toilet training today is happening a lot later, particularly in countries like Europe and North America, than it has in any previous generation. In less affluent countries, children are still toilet trained at much younger age than they are here. We actually believe that the Victorians started toilet training their children when they were about 12 months of age, and that by the 1940s, most children had started toilet training by the time they were 18 months old. But in the 1960s, only half had started toilet training at that age. In the 1980s, most children were toilet trained after they were 18 months. And much more recently, we're very aware that many schools and nurseries are actually complaining about children starting in nappies at 3 years of age. And we believe this is because parents and carers today are often advised to wait until their children are ready to toilet train. So part of the reason for that later toilet training is because of the way we're actually parenting. So parenting used to be very, very autocratic and very parent-led, and children were very much expected to fit into a routine. It was thought that giving children too much attention and affection would not actually prepare them to be strong individuals in what's a very harsh world. But in the middle of the 20th century, attitudes changed, and parents were very much advised to follow their instincts and be more responsive to children and their needs. So parenting became much, much more child-led, and toilet training was affected by this. It was suggested that making children toilet train at an early age might cause harm, and parents were advised to wait until their child was ready. And then the child-led approach of waiting until they appear ready to toilet train worked really, really well when children were wearing washable diapers, and most mothers didn't work outside the home. But children are less aware of peeing and pooing in a disposable that absorbs the moisture very quickly, and the child might not be motivated to change something that's working very well for them. We also know that disposable diapers are much more convenient for parents and carers. When children were wearing washable diapers, mothers would often sit them on the potty after a meal or drink, trying to catch a wee or poo and save some washing and drying, and that's obviously not needed when a child's wearing a disposable. Parents also knew exactly when the child had weed or pooed, so they could start timed toileting or potty sitting around the child's natural routine. Another change more recently is that far more mothers actually work away from the home, so there's less time for toilet training, and there's a belief that if the parent waits until the child's ready, it'll be done in a few days. Disposables are relatively cheaper than they were when they were first introduced, so they're much more affordable to many parents now than they were in the 70s and the 1980s. So what problems are there? Hopefully the next slide, yeah. There is very little research on toilet training, and what there is uses very different ways of training and very different definitions for it. So professionals don't agree on what advice should be given. We recommend that parents and carers should not rely on the signs that children might be ready to toilet train, and that's particularly so if the children have got additional needs, as many of the children won't actually show some of these signs. If the signs are used, then healthcare professionals and parents don't know when the right time to start toilet training is, and they often make assumptions that a child can't toilet train until they've reached certain developmental milestones. So many parents change the children's diapers with them lying down in a very convenient location. However, if we want the child to start associating pee and poo with toileting, they should be changed in the bathroom or toilet. And the child can then be shown any solid poo in the diaper before it's tipped into the toilet and flushed away. Children are able to stand should be changed in a standing position, as this allows them to be more involved with the process. They can help to move their clothes, they can undo the diaper tabs, they can also help to check to see if there's any pee or poo in the diaper. Asking everyone who's involved in the child's care to use the same words for pee and poo will also help the child to learn the language for toileting. And talking about pee and poo in the nappy rather than saying you're dirty or that's yucky, which is also used in other contexts, can prevent the child from getting confused. If the child's not able to talk, using signs while they're saying the words might help. And teaching the child about wet and dry, such as when washing hands, also helps them to learn. It's at this point, when we're sort of looking at encouraging changes towards toilet training, that parents and carers need to think about whether they're going to use a potty or whether they're going to use the toilet. And they need to make sure they've got the right equipment so the child sits in the right position. And the right position for peeing and pooing is where the pelvic floor can be relaxed. So the knees need to be higher than the hips, the feet need to be flat on a firm surface. And it's very, very important that the child feels both safe and comfortable. Some children find they need an occupational therapy assessment to get the right equipment. And it's also a good idea to try and make sure the child's having enough to drink, particularly water-based drinks, and they're having a balanced diet, including fruit and vegetables to prevent constipation, if that's possible. And we know that some children get very not easy to help to change their diet and their fluid intake.
We're going to move on to James now, and he's going to talk about the correlation between disability and levels of continence.
Hi everyone, so as Sophie mentioned, my name's James, I'm the OT here at Firefly. So to start with, if we have a little look at what some of the evidence says about toilet in children with cerebral palsy. This study, which I've explored, looks at the correlation between varying levels of severity of disability against gaining continence. So I've included the reference of this study at the bottom of the page there, and we'll put this up on the Firefly website, which you can access that at a later date if you'd like. What this study shows is that when we generalise cerebral palsy as a population, we can see that there's clear correlation between a child's level of disability and their ability to remain continent. Essentially what it's saying is the more severe the disability, the less likely continence is achieved. So the study summarises that all children with mild physical and intellectual impairments could be fully continent by 5.5 years. 50% of children with moderate intellectual and physical difficulties can be continent by 7 to 9. 33% with moderate physical but severe intellectual could be fully continent by 8 to 11, but few children with both severe physical and intellectual impairments will gain continence. However, it's really important to note that that study just generalises cerebral palsy as an entire population, and it gives a simple yes or no answer as to whether the child is continent or not. It doesn't really leave any room for in between. However, so we at Firefly, we embody this belief that even the smallest steps can make the biggest difference when it comes to increasing independence, self-esteem and dignity. So I'd like you to try and imagine that the toilet training process is just like a bus journey. On the bus journey, there may be many different stops for all different levels of ability. Sometimes on your journey, you might get stuck in a little bit of traffic. So getting to this next stop might be a little delayed. This might even cause you to get a little bit frustrated on the way, or perhaps you might look at taking another route to reach your destination. Sometimes you might need to ask the driver or some of the passengers who will be your clinical support and families that are in similar situations for their assistance along the way. But just remember that just because your stop might be a little earlier than someone else's, it does not make it any less meaningful. We're all completing our own journeys and have our own destinations. So what I mean by this, as an example, your end destination might be helping your child to communicate if they need changed, rather than perhaps waiting for you to notice, whereas somebody else's might be to achieve daytime continence. So why is it then that many children are not progressing with their toilet skills? Well, many believe that children with bladder and bowel dysfunction are often an overlooked population, and intervention usually targets the physical and intellectual development and ignores toileting potential. So a group of researchers use this motivation. Again, I've included the reference at the bottom there, and they explored toileting success when the right supports are in place. So interestingly, they found that when the right pathway is put in place, which included a thorough assessment of skills, the right clinical support and suitable equipment, that even children with more profound physical and cognitive disabilities can achieve improved bladder and bowel control and become less reliant on carers. So next, I'm going to talk a bit about the science behind toileting difficulties, but to try and keep these things as easily understood as possible, and in addition to me not being a neurologist of any kind, I won't go into any depth. Essentially, neurological development is a natural occurrence that occurs in all of us as our brain and body develops. What this means is that there are pathways in which messages travel through from the brain to stimulate muscles over time. There can be preconceived ideas behind when this control is established. However, as Davina mentioned earlier, toileting readiness can be significantly influenced by the toilet training we receive and by our own cultures as well. So naturally, what the normal occurrence that generally happens is that children will achieve nighttime bowel control, then daytime bowel control, daytime bladder control, and nighttime bladder control. But the age in which this is achieved varies from person to person, and is much dependent on training and culture. So how do these neurological pathways interfere with toilet training? Well, neurodevelopmental disabilities, like cerebral palsy, can interfere or entirely send the wrong signals between the brain and muscle, including the ones involved in bladder and bowel function. Sometimes, like in the case of spinal trauma, the muscles below the level of lesion might not be able to communicate altogether. So these disrupted signals also affect the muscles of the body. Typically, you might see fluctuating tone in children with cerebral palsy, or perhaps uncontrolled muscle movements. Think about your own response to needing to go to the bathroom. You're automatically able to control your muscles to hold it in. But what if your brain is misfiring those signals? And for children who that happens, they may struggle to control the muscles associated with toileting, or they might not even have the strength to actually hold on to going. So on top of the neurological difficulties related to toilet training, there's a huge range of additional difficulties which can hinder toileting success. Some of these, if you have a glance through them, are likely relatable to your own children. So, for example, a child's posture or range of movement may prevent them from sitting on a toilet seat altogether. Perhaps they may have the right equipment at home, but what if they went down to granny's house or out to the park? Where do they go there? Maybe they don't have the right facilities. Reduced mobility can disrupt all of your internal organs from functioning effectively, which can often lead to constipation. Likewise, certain medications reduce fluid intake, that will also contribute to this. Even things that we take for granted, like a child's vision, may also play a part. For example, it may impair their balance or even their ability to learn through imitation, so they won't get to see mum, dad, brother and sister go to the toilet and learn by seeing. So at this stage, I would like you to introduce you all to Sarah. So Sarah, if you're happy enough to, would you be okay in telling us all a little bit about yourself and Hadley and how your toilet journey began, some of the challenges that you face and continue to face, I'm sure, and what sort of support you've received on your journey?
Yeah, so my son Hadley, he's a twin. He was born severely prematurely at 27 weeks. As a result of that, he has cerebral palsy that affects his whole body. Put simply, it affects mainly his legs, but his whole body. So he's unable to walk or stand unaided, and he uses a wheelchair full time. On a good day, Hadley can now hold his wee. He's good bladder control most of the time, and he does recognise when he needs to go, and he can tell us. But in a bad day, much as James was saying, muscle. If he's had a particularly slow day in terms of movement, not many changes of position, it can be a little trickier. So he still wears nappies at the moment full time to catch any mishaps, essentially. He also, at the moment, although he's dry at night and able to control his bladder quite well, he struggles with his bowel control, and that's not something that he currently is able to really tell us when to go. He also, again, as James was discussing earlier, he struggles with constipation, which also obviously has a big impact on that because of his condition and the lack of movement, and also the muscle control there. One of the other key things for Hadley in using the toilet is that he needs to lie down before he can be safely lifted to the toilet, because his muscle condition causes his legs to scissor, to cross. His default position is crossed. So in order to safely toilet him, he needs to lie down for us to remove his underwear, nappy, trousers, etc., which hinders the entire toileting process quite a lot, as you can imagine.
And Sarah, what was it that motivated Hadley's toilet training? Was it you that decided, or did he tell you he wanted to go to the toilet?
Yeah, he's very much led it. We've not really been guided a huge amount. We have great therapists and great doctors, but we haven't been guided a huge amount in terms of what he would be able to do in terms of continence. And he's struggled because of the need to lie down to be toileted. When we're out and about, there are very few public toilets that we can use that actually are able to facilitate that. So he inevitably ends up having to lie on public toilet floors or being led in the back of a car, which has caused him a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, as you can imagine. So we haven't pushed him, we've let him guide it. But I think because he's in mainstream school and he has a twin sister who he can watch go to the loo, that's helped him want to become continent and want to use the toilet.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm sorry, I sort of ran ahead of myself a bit before, but encouraging changes is usually the first step when we're looking at building on skills for toilet training, because there's a lot of skills that the child needs to have. So if we start working on them gradually, and the first thing to think about is where you change the child. So many parents will change their child's diapers wherever's convenient. But for the child to start to associate wee and poo with toileting, then it's a good idea to always change them in the bathroom. And the child should be shown any solid poo then before it's tipped down the toilet and flushed away, to give them the idea of where it should go. And also when children are mobile, or if they can stand, then they should be changed in a standing position, because that allows them to be much more involved with the process. They can help to move their own clothes, they can undo the diaper tabs, and they can also help the parent to check to see if there's any pee or poo in the diaper. And if everybody involved with the child's care uses the same words for pee or poo, that helps the child to understand and learn the language for toileting. And also using the words pee and poo to describe what's in the nappy rather than something like "you're dirty" can also help the child to understand and prevents confusion. And it's once we've started to do all of this that parents and carers need to think about whether they're going to use a potty or whether they're going to use a toilet for their child. and to get the right equipment for them. We need children to sit in a good position with a relaxed pelvic floor. So their knees ideally need to be slightly higher than their hips, and their feet need to be on a flat, firm surface. And it's really, really important that the child actually feel safe and comfortable. And some children need an occupational therapy assessment to help them find the right equipment. And it's also a very good idea, if possible, to make sure the child's being encouraged with drinking enough water-based drinks and is having as balanced a diet as possible, including fruit and vegetables, to avoid constipation. So then once we've done that, we need to start thinking about working on the skills. And for this, children need to work. The skills children need for full independence include being able to pull their clothes up and down. They need to learn to wash and dry their hands. And most importantly, they need to learn to sit on the toilet or potty for long enough to actually finish a pee or a poo. And initially, some children may only be willing to sit for a few seconds. The important thing is that we praise them for doing so, and we use techniques such as distraction or special toys to keep them sitting for a bit longer. And then gradually we can increase the time they're sitting until they manage a few minutes. And how long they sit for will depend a little bit on the age of the child. We usually say not more than a minute for each year of their life. And up to sort of 5 minutes really is the most that probably most children need. So there's no expectation at this stage of them peeing or pooing. They're just learning to sit, and it's a real bonus if we get something in the right place. Some children love to flush the toilet, and that can be used as a reward for sitting without a fuss. Others are frightened of the flush, and if they are frightened, then the flush shouldn't be used while they're nearby. And things like social stories and picture cue cards can help with distraction, but they can also help to teach children what to expect. And praise and reward obviously reinforce those behaviours when the children get it right. The next stage is to actually think about their bladder and bowel patterns, and we can do that with a toileting chart. And a toileting chart is a chart where parents or carers write down all the child's drinks, when they've eaten, and their pees and poos for a few days. And the way they do this is the nappy should be checked, or the diaper should be checked every hour when the child's awake to see if they've actually had a pee or a poo. And if they've only dribbled a tiny bit, it might be impossible to see. So we suggest a piece of kitchen towel, because that doesn't disintegrate when it's wet. It's actually put inside the diaper, and then that will show up just a few drops of pee. The child can be involved in the checking as well. And normally we'd expect a child to be able to stay dry for about 1.5 hours or more and be passing a soft poo most days up to 3 times a day for potty training to be successful. If they're peeing or pooing very differently than this, then it's a good idea to discuss their charts with a healthcare professional who can advise. And then finally, it's about biting the bullet and getting them to start using the potty. So the next stage then is to actually remove those diapers and start taking the child to the potty or the toilet. And this can be done as part of their routine around when they're most likely to wee or poo, and the toileting chart can be useful to actually show that. Parents and carers need to have a plan for dealing with accidents, and they need to remember that that's a learning opportunity, or that it can be very frustrating and difficult to manage. It can actually help the child to learn what's expected. So if the child has wet or soiled, then just saying their name, telling them they've peed or pooed, taking them to the bathroom, changing them, and then encouraging them to sit on the potty or toilet for a short time and remind them that's where the pee or the poo goes, either verbally or using the picture cues or the social story will help. And it's a really good idea to start using toilets when you're out and about as soon as possible, so the child learns they can use any toilet. And it's also good to involve them in cleaning themselves up as soon as possible as well. And it might help to keep a note of progress, because if you feel things are moving slowly, to be able to look back over that record and actually see progress has been made can be really, really helpful. So when the right support's actually in place, we know that parents and carers are much less anxious. Most families get very, very worried about toilet training, probably more than any other aspect of development. And we also know that if the right support's there, the children make very good progress, and many, many children can toilet train, as James said earlier, with the right support and the right assessment. But if there are problems, or if the child is delayed in toilet training, then we really should be doing an early assessment of their bladder and of their bowel health to make sure there isn't a problem that's been missed, and to get treatment in place quickly if it's needed. And also the assessment can help to retune things with the toilet training so the child can start to make progress.
We're just going to move on to some success stories now that Davina's going to walk us through, and then we will open the session up to questions.
Okay, so the first success story is really about a young lady who was 4 years old, and she had a learning disability. And she was referred because she hadn't managed to toilet train. But the chart that we did, the chart where Mum sort of wrote down every hour whether she was wet or dry and what she'd had to eat and drink and when she'd pooed, that actually showed that she probably had constipation. So she was referred to a healthcare professional, and the constipation was treated with laxatives. And after a few weeks, she made a huge improvement with that. And her parents were supported to find a toilet seat reducer, so the toilet was the right size for her bottom and she felt comfortable, and also steps so her feet were in the right place. And over time, she learnt to sit, she learnt to manage her clothes, and she also learnt to wash her hands. But this young lady didn't quite manage to learn where we went, and she continued to go in her pants. So what we did with her was we actually used a wetting alarm, very similar to a nighttime bedwetting alarm. So a little box that actually was pinned onto the back of her clothes, sort of behind her shoulder blades, where she couldn't reach it easily. And then the wire went inside her clothes, a little clip that went onto her pants. And as soon as she was wet, the sound box on her back made a noise. And that noise alerted her mum to the fact that she'd done a wee. And also she so quickly learned that that's what the noise was about, because her mum would say her name and take her straight to the toilet and sit her on the toilet and say pee in the toilet. And within a few days, she actually learned to pee in the toilet, and poos followed very, very quickly. So she was about 4.5 when she was fully toilet trained. Julie was an older girl. She was 6. She had lots of mobility problems and was really struggling with walking and fell over very regularly, and she used a frame a lot of the time. And her mother was advised to leave toilet training because she needed some surgery. And she was told not to worry, and that Julie would tell her when she was ready to toilet train. But Julie didn't really fuss about wearing a nappy, a diaper, and she wouldn't say when she was wet or soiled, and she wouldn't sit on the potty or toilet when she was asked to, for a very long time. And then one day she actually asked if she could wear pants. So her mum put the pants on her, but then Julie didn't actually pee for several hours, and her mum got very worried that might cause her some damage, so she put her back into the diapers. And she carried on for some time, and then the school nurse was asked if she could offer some support. The school nurse actually talked to Julie directly, and Julie, like many children, didn't tell her mum exactly what she thought, but was quite happy to tell somebody else. And what she said was she didn't feel safe when she was sitting on the toilet because her balance wasn't very good, and she didn't want to sit on a potty like a baby, but she was frightened she was going to fall if she was on the toilet. So the school nurse arranged a referral to the occupational therapist for her, and they did an assessment and provided her with a toilet seat which had support at the sides and something she could hold on to, and also had foot supports as well. So once Julie felt safe and secure on the toilet, she actually learned to use it within a couple of days and stayed in pants and was clean and dry from then on. So for both these children and for many other children we've worked with, it's really about working out what the problem is and making sure they have the right support at the right time.
I think Sarah is back on the line. Whether or not we can hear her is another thing, but question's still relevant. She's still listening, Davina.
And Davina, if you were to give Sarah any advice on toileting with Hadley, what approach would you suggest she would take, or would you have any tips for her for toileting Hadley?
Well, I think Sarah has done incredibly well with Hadley, and I think when children's mobility is as restricted as Hadley's is, it's very, very difficult. I think, it's finding the right toilet seat is the first thing, and hopefully the occupational therapist can help with that, and also finding the right way to transfer him. For some children, things like urinals might help, but if their children are very stiff and their legs are scissoring, then generally speaking, they're not ideal because the legs generally need to be slightly apart for the urinal to sit in the right place. And we can use urinals for girls as well as for boys. So for Hadley, it's really going to be a question of helping him with the constipation because and getting the laxatives right, and that will help to get the poo in the right place and having the right seat. And then if Hadley's able to communicate early enough when he needs the toilet, then that hopefully will help as well. So helping him with communication. But not knowing Hadley well, it's difficult to offer more sort of targeted support than that.
Sarah, thanks for coming back on again. I know you can probably... Did you have anything else that you wanted to add or to ask Davina, or?
it was interesting what you said, Davina, actually, about the seat, because that's something that we've struggled with more than anything, is having something comfortable for Hadley. We've managed to tackle his constipation now with diet, particularly losing gluten from his diet. So he's no longer having to take any laxative, but it still requires quite a lot of time for him to have a movement. So it's sitting in a position that's actually comfortable for his little body, that doesn't always do what he wants it to do, that we've really struggled with, and we still don't have a brilliant solution. He's currently using quite a good setup at school. At home we have a sort of commode chair, which again isn't perfect. And then when we're out, we don't have anything portable that's able to support him properly, to be comfortable. So I think that's a really key point, and I think that's something that probably lots of other people really struggle with.
And that's very, very difficult if he needs a fixed piece of equipment. Then, as you say, when you're out and about, that becomes very, very difficult. I think in terms of the time he has to sit to have a motion, to do a poo, then for some children a very small dose of laxative and maybe a stimulant laxative that moves everything through slightly faster rather than a softening laxative which makes everything squidgier, looser, might work well. And with a very small dose of that, if his healthcare professionals are happy with that, might actually mean he has to sit for slightly less time. And for some children with cerebral palsy, and when they get uncomfortable, they're more likely to have more spasms and more tightening of the muscles, which also then makes it harder for them to go.
Yeah, that makes sense, definitely.
With all toilet training, it's really about working out what the issues are for that individual. And sometimes we have to think outside the box to find a solution. And in terms of seating, that is a really, really difficult problem for children who have got the sort of tone issues he's got. Without meeting Hadley, it's very difficult to add very much more.
No, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. It's interesting that you talk about laxative, because he's only ever really been prescribed Movicol, which is a softener. Seems to be what's generally prescribed to everyone who has any kind of constipation, which hasn't really worked for him. Well, it has softened his, it hasn't helped him. I think
we tend to underestimate the impact of constipation on children, and parents tend to worry about using medicines in children, particularly if their children have to be on other medicines for other medical problems. But actually, if we use laxatives well and we use the right one for the right child, the right place at the right time, then they can really, really improve toilet training and can really help. And we underestimate how many children have constipation, and that's among typically developing children. And we know children with additional needs, as James said earlier, because of the muscle control problems, but also sometimes because of dietary issues or drinking issues, are more prone to constipation than the rest of the population.
Sarah and Davina, thank you for that. Sarah, thank you for giving us your time and talking us through your own personal experiences. And we're going to move on now to ask a few questions.
Yeah, so we're going to direct probably a lot of these to Davina.
Yeah, okay, so
right.
We'll have a number of them here, Davina. The first one is probably, we've got something here from somebody asking, how would you go about establishing a need to go kind of signal for a non-verbal child?
In the same way that we use picture cue communications for most non-verbal children, we can have exactly the same sort of communication system. And for children who are using more high-tech communication systems, then they can be programmed to have a toileting request on there as well. And what we would normally say is we'd show the child the picture cue card, if that's what's being used, or we'd use the other form of communication, say toilet time, and then we take the child to the toilet, put them on the toilet. So we can do it in a just using different communication techniques than we would with the children who can vocalise. And some children will use sign language as well, so teaching them a sign for toilet, showing them that sign, getting them to copy the sign and then taking them to the toilet can really help them to then learn that that's what it's about.
Okay. Another one we have here is around wedding alarms. So somebody would like to know more about what those are, Davina, and any other suggestions for in and around nighttime toilet training?
Right, well, the wetting alarms for the daytime, basically they are the same as the wetting alarms that are sometimes used for nighttime. The wetting alarms for daytime, they as a sound box, and we suggest the body-worn alarm, so a little sound box that can pin between the shoulder blades, and then the wire goes underneath the clothing and the clip goes onto the pants. And then as soon as the clip gets wet, that sends a message up to the box which makes a noise. We suggest that when these are used, ideally they're used at home, when the family can be at home most of the time, and that the mum or the main carer is around the child so that they hear as soon as that alarm starts to make a noise. They then say the child's name, take them by the hand and take them to the toilet saying, no, pee in the toilet, and sit them on the toilet, and then say again, pee on the toilet, and turn the alarm off. If the child's getting upset by the noise, obviously they turn the alarm off then. So that's how we do them for daytime. Nighttime wetting is completely different, and training for nighttime is very different to training for the daytime. Most children will become dry at night by the time they're about 5 years old, or within about 6 months of toilet training during the day. If they don't become dry at night, then we have to remember that a lot of children suffer from a condition that we call enuresis. And what that is that's wetting while you're asleep. And enuresis is caused by a number of different problems. It can be caused by constipation. It can be caused by the bladder not holding enough wee. It can be caused by the bladder muscle twitching when it shouldn't during the filling stage. And it can be caused by children making so much wee at night, the bladder can't hold it all. And these children have a problem with actually concentrating wee overnight. Most of us make less wee at night than we do during the day, and that's why we can stay dry. So really, if a child's wet at night after the age of 5, or when they've been dry for at least 6 months during the day, the first thing to do is make sure they're drinking as well as they can during the day, that drinks are avoided in the last hour before bed, that fizzy drinks and drinks that contain caffeine, such as tea, coffee, hot chocolate, cola, and most energy drinks are avoided in the most of the time, but particularly before bed, because those can irritate the bladder. And make sure the child has a really good bedtime routine. If those things don't work, then it's worth asking a healthcare professional for an assessment, because unfortunately, just because a child's got additional needs doesn't mean they can't suffer from the problems that any other child can get. So it is perfectly possible for them to have the condition that we call enuresis or bedwetting. So as I say, it's best to ask for an assessment for that. And for some children, an alarm is the right treatment for bedwetting, but it's not right for everybody, which is why the children need to be assessed.
Okay, thanks Davina. We have another one here from Suzanne. We are currently trying to toilet train my son who's 6. He talks a lot about going to the toilet but doesn't seem to have made the connection between sitting on the toilet and actually doing a wee. He has once by chance done a wee while sitting on the toilet but was totally surprised by it. He also doesn't react when wet. Do you have any suggestions to help him make this connection?
Wetting alarms can work really, really well to help with that connection. Timed toileting helps with some children, so if you keep a diary of when they're drinking and eating and when they're wetting, then you might start to pick up patterns after a few days, so you can see that they might be wet after 10 minutes after a drink, so you can start taking them to the toilet 5 minutes after a drink. And avoiding the use of diapers at all during the day can also help. Now that's quite a big ask of parents, but there are washable absorbent pants on the market, and those the children actually do feel the moisture generally with them. But we have to remember that some children with sensory differences might have a lower perception of touch, so they might not be as aware when they're wet as other children. And again, for those children, the wetting alarms can work really well. But I would suggest that Suzanne asks her healthcare professional for some support and some suggestions.
Okay, thank you for that, Davina. If there are any other questions out there, feel free. Actually, there's just one other one here. Bear with me. What about toilet transfers for older children, Davina? How would you manage that for older children who aren't ambulant? What would be the advice there?
Yeah, I mean, I think It's avoiding transfers as much as possible. So as I said earlier, the use of urinals should be looked at, because then if the child just wants to pee, they don't have to be transferred, which can make life a lot easier. And there are male urinals and there are female urinals, and there are different designs that actually can fit with different wheelchairs. But if a child's in a moulded wheelchair, then that makes the use of urinal more difficult, and they may need to be transferred onto a specialist toilet seat to pee. Obviously, to poo, they need to be transferred. So really, it's about using a hoist and transferring them using the hoist, which an occupational therapist should be able to help assess for that. I don't know whether James has got any comments on that at all.
Yeah, I think the moving and handling around it, I know it's very much on a case-by-case basis, and definitely with the different legislation in different countries. Again, I would be advising families, if you're in any way struggling with moving and handling, especially when it comes to lifting children, you should contact your OT as soon as possible. That way they'll be able to explore transfer options, like Davina said, like hoists or other types of standing transfer equipment. That way you can reduce any risks to yourself and your child.
And Davina, another one here from Nisha. Why do mainstream nurseries often insist that toilet training has been completed by a certain age, for example 2 or 3 years old? What?
Mainstream nurseries feel their primary purpose is education, and when teachers think about education, they think about reading, writing, counting, and that sort of thing. And therefore they feel that this skill, which used to be learnt, by the time children could walk or shortly after, they feel children should be competent in that skill by the time they go to nursery. And teachers don't necessarily understand that for some children, toilet training is delayed because of a health problem. And for others, if we haven't started building on those skills early, then the children take longer to learn. And for some children, particularly those with sensory or processing differences, the longer we leave them in a diaper, the more difficult that training can become. Now, certainly in the United Kingdom, we have legislation now called the Equality Act 2010, which means that nurseries are no longer able to refuse children admission because they're not toilet trained, as that might be due to a medical or disability issue. The legislation is different in other countries. So I think it's really important, if you want your child to go to nursery, that you actually have a conversation with them about what the problems are and why you're struggling, and discuss it with your healthcare professional as well, because if there is a medical reason for it, then the nursery should be able to provide some support, and certainly everybody should be working together. Whatever childcare the child's accessing, they should be working with the family to actually promote toilet training. And if everybody's doing it the same way, the child's more likely to make progress. If people are doing things differently, then it can become very, very confusing for the child.
Okay, great. And then I think we'll finish up with the questions there, guys, but just a tip from Jerry around what they do with their son. He is put onto the potty and he gets a book whilst he's there, and when he puts the book away, they understand then that he's ready to go. So that's a way that they've come up with, that they communicate, that the child Thomas isn't able to talk, but he can communicate. So Jerry's just saying it is possible to find other ways of signalling that the child is ready to go. So I suppose it's just trying different things and until you find something that works. Davina, is that often the case with this area?
I think with all children, everybody is different and everybody has a unique set of skills and a unique set of difficulties. And the problem for parents and carers, and also for healthcare professionals and others, is working out what the issue is for that child. Because once we know what the problem is, we can very often find a creative way of solving it. And it's about finding those creative solutions, which might vary from child to child. But I think Jerry's tip is absolutely great. And yes, that would work for a lot of children. So it is about finding what works for you and your child.
And Davina, just to finish off the session, if you could give our listeners a main point to take away from this, or a couple of main points to bear in mind, what would they be?
I think there are a couple of things that I would say, and the first thing is that we should never make assumptions about what children can or cannot do about anything really, but particularly about toilet training. We should be offering assessment and support, as most children can make at least some progress with toilet training, even if a disability means they cannot be independent. And we would offer support to children in a range of other skills. It's only because we've got really good quality disposable diapers that we tend to use those rather than assessing for toilet training ability. And the other thing I think we need to remember is that being continent promotes dignity. It really helps children's self-esteem, and it can improve quality of life for everybody, for the children and for the carers. You know, changing a child tends to take longer and be more difficult than helping them to use the toilet. So all children should be helped to reach their potential in this area, as they are in most other areas of their lives. And I think that's what's absolutely key to this, is that we help them to reach their potential.
Okay, and just to finish off, these are some helpful links for those of you that would like more information on toilet training. We've got Bladder and Bowel UK, we have Eric and Scope, and Healthy Children, and One Place for Special Needs. And we're going to sign off now, but thank you very much for listening, and if you have any follow-up questions, contact us at Firefly. Thank you.
And I'll also say, sorry guys, any questions that we didn't cover there, we'll follow up with answers either after the webinar or in the following days. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye bye.